I didn't understand what was happening at first. The call came late, too late. And even now I sometimes wonder if that was intentional. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, dragging me out of a shallow sleep. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me, something quiet and instinctive, pushed me to answer. It was my cousin. Her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. "Hey, are you okay?" The question felt strange. "Yeah," I said slowly, sitting up. "Why wouldn't I be?" There was a pause. Not a normal pause, but the kind that stretches too long. Filled with hesitation and something unspoken. My chest tightened before she even said the words. "I thought you knew," she said carefully. "Grandma's in the hospital. She's not doing well." For a moment, everything inside me went still. "What?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Since when?" "Yesterday," she replied. "They admitted her in the afternoon. Yesterday." The room felt colder somehow. I swung my legs off the bed, pacing without realizing it. "Why is this the first I'm hearing about it?" I asked. "Why didn't anyone call me?" Another pause. This one heavier. I thought your dad told you," she said. "He said you already knew. He said you didn't want to come." The words didn't make sense. Not at first. They just floated there, disconnected, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. "I didn't want to come," I repeated, my voice quieter now, but edged with something dangerous. "Why would I not want to come?" She exhaled shakily. "He told everyone you've been going through something, that you're not in the right state of mind right now." Something in my chest cracked. "What does that even mean?" I demanded. "He said you've been unstable," she admitted, almost whispering the last word, like she was afraid to say it too loudly. Unstable. The label hit me like a slap. For a second I actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just disbelief, sharp and bitter. "That's ridiculous," I said. "You know that, right?" "I know," she said quickly. I didn't believe him. "That's why I called. It just didn't feel right." Of course it didn't. Because it wasn't true. But that didn't mean it wasn't effective. I pressed my hand against my forehead, trying to think clearly, but my thoughts kept spiraling. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. My father hadn't just forgotten to tell me. He had actively made sure I stayed away. "Which hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. She told me, and I hung up without another word. The drive felt like a blur. Streetlights stretched into long streaks, the road unfolding beneath me faster than I could process. My grip on the steering wheel tightened with every passing minute, my mind replaying the conversation over and over again. Unstable. It wasn't a new tactic. My father had always had a way of twisting things, of reshaping reality until it suited him. Growing up, anytime I disagreed with him, I was too emotional. Anytime I stood my ground, I was difficult. And if I ever tried to call him out, he'd smile that calm, dismissive smile and say I was imagining things. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He controlled the story. And now he had taken it further than ever before. By the time I reached the hospital, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. The building loomed ahead, bright and sterile, completely indifferent to the storm inside me. I rushed inside, the smell of antiseptic hitting me immediately. The waiting area was quieter than I expected, a few people scattered in chairs, their faces tired and drawn. For a moment I hesitated, a strange sense of dread washing over me. What if I was too late? I pushed the thought away and walked straight to the front desk. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see my grandmother." I gave her name, my fingers tapping restlessly against the counter. The receptionist nodded and began typing. The soft clacking of the keyboard filled the silence between us. For a second, everything felt normal, routine even, like this would be simple. Then she paused. It was subtle, just a slight hesitation, a flicker in her expression. But I noticed. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, looking up at me. "Can you repeat your name?" I did, my stomach tightening. She typed again, her eyes scanning the screen. This time the pause lasted longer. "I'm sorry," she said again, her tone more careful now. "But you're not on the approved visitors list." The words landed like a punch. "That's not possible," I said immediately. "I'm her granddaughter. I understand," she replied gently, but there was something guarded in her voice now. However, we have specific instructions here. From who? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. From your father, of course. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Okay, I said. Then call him. Tell him I'm here. She didn't move. Instead, she glanced back at the screen, then back at me. There's also a note attached, she said carefully. My chest tightened. What kind of note? Her eyes softened. Just slightly. It says you're not permitted to visit due to concerns about your mental state. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I stared at her, waiting for her to say it was a mistake, that she had read it wrong. But she didn't. He said I'm what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, she said again. But apologies didn't change anything. I felt every pair of eyes in the waiting area on me, even if they weren't actually looking. The word echoed in my head, louder and louder, drowning out everything else. Unstable, crazy, unfit. He hadn't just lied, he had erased me. Because what better way to make sure no one listened to me than to make them believe I couldn't be trusted at all? My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. Anger surged through me, hot and sharp, cutting through the shock. This wasn't just about keeping me away. This was about control, about making sure that whatever happened next, whatever decisions were made, whatever papers were signed, I wouldn't be there to question it. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand straighter. Can I at least know how she is? I asked. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded slightly. She's stable for now, she said. But it's serious. Serious. Another word that felt too small for what it meant. I nodded, even though it didn't feel like enough. Okay, I said quietly. But I didn't leave. Because something inside me had shifted. If my father thought this would keep me away, if he thought he could rewrite the truth, and I would just accept it, then he didn't know me as well as he thought. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about seeing my grandmother. This was a fight I wasn't going to walk away from. I didn't leave. Even after the receptionist's words settled into something heavy and real, even after the sting of humiliation and disbelief, I couldn't make myself walk out those doors. My legs felt rooted to the floor. Like leaving would mean accepting what my father had done, accepting that he had the right to decide whether I existed in that room or not. So I stayed. At first, I sat in one of the stiff waiting room chairs, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The TV mounted on the wall played some late-night program at low volume, but I couldn't focus on it. Every sound felt distant, muffled by the noise in my own head. Unstable. The word replayed over and over, digging deeper each time. It wasn't just an insult. It was strategic. It was designed to discredit me before I even opened my mouth. If anyone questioned my father, all he had to do was point to that label and suddenly nothing I said would matter. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think beyond the anger. Why? That question sat at the center of everything. Why would he go this far? The answer didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, piece by piece, like something I already knew but didn't want to admit. Money. Or more specifically, control over it. Grandma had always been careful about her finances. She wasn't wealthy in a flashy way, but she had savings, property, and investments, enough to matter. More importantly, she had always been vocal about fairness. She believed in dividing things equally, making sure no one was left out. My father hated that. He never said it directly. But I had seen it in the way his jaw tightened whenever she talked about it, in the way he would change the subject or dismiss it as unnecessary. He believed he deserved more because he was the son, because he had sacrificed. Because in his mind, everything naturally revolved around him. And me. I had always been the inconvenient variable. The one who asked questions. The one who didn't just accept his version of events. The one who couldn't be molded into quiet agreement. If I wasn't here, if I couldn't speak to Grandma, then I couldn't confirm anything. I couldn't challenge him. I couldn't stop him. The realization settled into my chest like a weight. This wasn't just about keeping me away from her bedside. This was about making sure I had no voice at all. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to steady myself. The hospital had grown quieter as the night deepened. Footsteps echoed less frequently in the halls, conversations fading into hushed tones. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in a pale, almost unreal glow. Time passed, though I couldn't say how much. Minutes blurred into hours. At some point, I stood up and started pacing, unable to sit still any longer. Every now and then, I glanced toward the reception desk, wondering if a different nurse might be more willing to listen, to bend the rules just a little. But each time I considered approaching them again, doubt crept in. What if my father had already convinced them? What if, the moment I spoke, they saw me exactly the way he had described? Difficult, emotional, unstable. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away. No, I wasn't going to let his narrative trap me before I even tried. Still, I knew I needed to be careful. Charging in angrily would only reinforce everything he had said about me. I had to be calm, controlled, strategic, just like him. The idea made something twist inside me, but I couldn't deny its truth. Around midnight, the energy in the hospital shifted. A new set of staff filtered in, exchanging quiet greetings with those finishing their shifts. The change was subtle, but noticeable. Fresh faces, different expressions, a different atmosphere, an opportunity. I straightened, taking a deep breath, preparing to approach the desk again. But before I could take more than a few steps, someone moved into my path. A nurse. She was older, maybe in her late 40s or early 50s, with kind but observant eyes. There was something steady about her presence, something that made me pause. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The question caught me off guard, not because it was unusual, but because of the way she asked it, like she actually cared about the answer. I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "I'm trying to see my grandmother, but there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, as if she were assessing something beyond my words. "I see," she said quietly. For a second, I thought she was going to ask me to leave, like the others probably would have. Instead, she stepped a little closer, her voice lowering just enough that no one else could hear. "Walk with me," she said. My heart skipped. I followed her without question, my mind racing. We didn't go far, just down the hall, away from the main waiting area, where the noise faded into a distant hum. She stopped near a corner, glancing briefly around to make sure no one was paying attention. Then, without another word, she slipped something into my hand. The movement was so quick, so subtle, that for a second I wasn't even sure it had happened. "Read this somewhere private," she whispered. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, her expression returning to professional neutrality as she disappeared down the hall. I stood there, frozen. My fingers curled around the small piece of paper she had given me, my pulse suddenly racing for an entirely different reason. A mix of confusion and cautious hope surged through me, pushing me toward the nearest bathroom. I locked myself inside a stall, my hands trembling as I unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the words pressed firmly into the paper. "You're not crazy. Your grandmother has been asking for you. Your father told us not to let you in. Room 312. Come at 2 a.m. I'll help you." I read it once, then again, and again. Each time the meaning sank in deeper. "You're not crazy." The validation hit me first, sharp and unexpected. I hadn't realized how much his words had gotten under my skin until that moment, how even a small part of me had started to question myself, to wonder if somehow I had done something to deserve this. But I hadn't. And someone else saw that. "Your grandmother has been asking for you." My throat tightened, emotion rising so suddenly it caught me off guard. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't believed his lies. She was waiting. For me. The rest of the note sent a surge of adrenaline through my system. Room 312, 2 a.m., a plan. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. This was deliberate, risky. The nurse was putting herself on the line to help me. I folded the note carefully, pressing it against my chest for a moment before slipping it into my pocket. Everything had changed. Just hours ago I had felt powerless, locked out, dismissed, erased. But now I had something my father didn't expect. A way in. I stepped out of the bathroom, my reflection catching in the mirror for a brief second. My eyes looked different, sharper, more focused. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. it had turned into something else. Determination. I checked the time. Not yet. The wait until 2 a.m. felt longer than anything I had experienced that night. Every minute dragged, my awareness heightened to every sound, every movement around me. I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal, to avoid drawing attention. But inside, everything was shifting. Because this was no longer just about getting past a front desk or bending a hospital rule. This was about reclaiming my place, and when the time came, I was going to take it. At exactly 2 a.m., I stood outside room 312. The hallway was dim, lit only by soft overhead lights that cast long shadows across the polished floor. The hospital felt like a different world at this hour, quieter, slower, as if everything had been reduced to the bare essentials of breathing and waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a machine beeped steadily, marking time in a way that made every second feel heavier. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure it could be heard through the door. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to stop me, to question why I was here. Every footstep, every faint movement made my chest tighten. The note burned in my pocket like a secret I wasn't supposed to carry. Room 312. This was it. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if this was a mistake? What if I got caught? What if my father had already set things up so tightly that even this wouldn't work? But then I remembered the words written in hurried ink. Your grandmother has been asking for you. That was all it took. I straightened, forcing my breathing to slow. Grounding myself in the only thing that mattered right now, I was here for her. Before I could reach for the door handle, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. The nurse. She walked toward me with calm, measured steps, her expression composed but her eyes alert. When she reached me, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Quickly, she said under her breath. Her hand moved to the door, pushing it open just enough for me to slip inside. The movement was smooth, practiced, like she had done things like this before, or at least knew exactly how to avoid drawing attention. 5 minutes? She added softly. Maybe 10, if we're lucky. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and stepped into the room. The air felt different immediately. Warmer, quieter, heavier with something I couldn't quite name. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the space, accompanied by the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. The lights were low, casting a gentle glow that made everything feel fragile. And there she was. My grandmother looked smaller than I remembered, her body sinking into the hospital bed, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the light, and her breathing was shallow but steady. For a moment, I couldn't move. This wasn't the strong, vibrant woman who used to laugh loudly at her own jokes, who insisted on cooking for everyone even when we told her to rest. This was someone delicate. Someone I could lose. The thought hit me like a wave, stealing the air from my lungs. Grandma, I whispered. My voice felt too loud in the quiet room, but at the same time, barely there. Her eyelids fluttered. For a second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her eyes opened. She looked confused at first, her gaze unfocused as it drifted across the room. But then it landed on me, and everything changed. Her expression softened, her eyes widening slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. You came, she breathed. 2 simple words. But they carried so much weight that I felt my chest tighten instantly. I tried. I said, stepping closer to the bed. My voice shook despite my efforts to keep it steady. I came as soon as I found out. I didn't know he didn't tell me. I reached for her hand, afraid it might feel cold or fragile. But when our fingers touched, she squeezed back, weakly, but unmistakably. I knew something was wrong, she said, her voice faint but clear. He told me you didn't want to see me. The words made my stomach twist. I would never do that, I said immediately, the intensity in my voice surprising even me. Never. I know, she whispered. That simple acknowledgement broke something inside me, because she believed me. Even when he tried to twist the truth, even when he tried to rewrite everything she knew. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. This wasn't the time to fall apart. I'm here now, I said softly, brushing my thumb over her hand. I'm not going anywhere. She studied my face for a moment, as if memorizing it. Good, she said. Because we don't have much time. The words sent a chill through me. Don't say that. I replied quickly, but my voice lacked conviction. She gave a faint, knowing smile. I'm not afraid of it, she said. But there are things you need to know. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly, a flicker of urgency replacing the weakness. Your father, she began, her voice lowering even further, has been trying to get me to sign papers. My heart skipped. What kind of papers? Changing things, she said. The will. The accounts. Everything. Anger surged through me, hot and immediate. I knew it. I muttered. I didn't sign, she added quickly. Not yet. I told him I needed time. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by something sharper. He lied to them, I said, my voice tightening. He told the hospital I'm unstable. That I shouldn't be allowed near you. Her expression darkened, a hint of strength returning to her eyes. He said the same to me, she admitted. Tried to make me believe you were not yourself. I shook my head, disbelief mixing with anger. How could he think that would work? Because it has before, she said quietly. The truth in her words hit harder than anything else. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung in the air between us, years of manipulation, of quiet control, of things left unsaid. But this time, it was different. Because this time we both saw it clearly. Listen to me, she said suddenly, her voice gaining a sense of urgency that made me lean closer. There are documents in my bag. The real ones. The ones I trust. I followed her gaze to a chair in the corner of the room, where a worn leather bag rested. Take them, she continued, and call my lawyer. Her number is inside. I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. I will, I said. Don't let him change things, she added, her grip tightening again. He thinks he can control everything. But he can't, not if you're here. I swallowed hard, the responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. I won't let him? I promised. For the first time since I entered the room, a sense of calm spread through me. Not because things were okay, they weren't. Not because the situation wasn't serious, it was. But because I finally understood what I needed to do. This wasn't just about being there for her in her final moments. This was about protecting her. Protecting her wishes. Protecting the truth. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. My head snapped up as the nurse peeked inside, her expression cautious. Time's almost up, she said quietly. Panic flickered in my chest. No, just a little longer, I pleaded softly. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. 2 minutes. I turned back to my grandmother, squeezing her hand gently. I'm gonna fix this, I said. I promise. She smiled faintly, her eyes soft. I know you will, she whispered. I leaned down, pressing a light kiss to her forehead, memorizing the warmth of her skin, the sound of her breathing, the way her hand felt in mine. Because I didn't know if I'd get another chance. And as I stepped back, preparing to leave, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just a goodbye. This was the beginning of a fight neither of us could afford to lose. Everything moved fast after that. But at the same time, every moment felt sharp and painfully clear, like my mind had switched into a different mode, one where there was no room for hesitation. The second I stepped out of room 312, the nurse gently closed the door behind me. Her calm expression returned, but her eyes flickered with urgency. Did you get what you needed? She asked quietly. I nodded, still holding on to the feeling of my grandmother's hand in mine. Yes. Thank you, I don't even know how to. Don't thank me yet, she said, cutting me off softly. You need to move quickly. If what you're saying is true, then he won't stop. We both knew who she meant. I won't let him? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She studied me for a second, as if deciding whether I was ready for what came next. Then she gave a small nod. Her bag, she reminded me. Take it now while the hallway is clear. I didn't waste another second. I slipped back into the room just long enough to grab the worn leather bag from the chair. It felt heavier than it looked, not just physically, but with everything it represented. Proof, protection, truth. When I came back out, the nurse gestured for me to follow her. We moved quickly but calmly down the hall, blending into the quiet rhythm of the hospital night. There's a staff copier room at the end of this corridor, she said under her breath. You'll have a few minutes. Make copies of everything important. Don't take chances. I nodded, my grip tightening on the bag. Inside the small room, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The space was cramped, filled with cabinets, a desk, and a large copier machine that hummed softly when I turned it on. My hands trembled as I opened the bag. Inside were neatly organized folders, each labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Wills, account details, property documents, and right on top, a separate set of papers that looked newer, less familiar. My stomach dropped. I pulled them out first. Even at a glance, I could tell something was wrong. The wording was different. The distribution of assets had changed. Heavily. Names that should have been there were missing. Percentages shifted in ways that didn't make sense unless someone was trying to redirect everything toward himself. My father hadn't just been planning this. He had already started. A surge of anger shot through me, so strong it made my hands shake harder. But I forced myself to stay focused. Anger wouldn't fix this. Evidence would. I fed the papers into the copier, watching as each page slid through, duplicating the truth my father had tried to manipulate. The sound of the machine felt unnaturally loud in the quiet room, making me flinch with every copy. I worked quickly, moving through each folder, prioritizing anything that looked official, signed, or recently altered. My mind raced as I sorted through it all, piecing together the story. He had brought these documents to her while she was vulnerable, while she was in pain, while she was alone, and he had expected her to sign them without question. The thought made my chest tighten with something deeper than anger. Disgust. When I finished, I carefully placed the originals back into the bag, making sure everything looked untouched. The copies I folded and slipped into my own bag, pressing them flat like they might disappear if I didn't hold onto them tightly enough. When I stepped back into the hallway, the nurse was waiting. "All done?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I have everything." "Good," she replied. "Then you need to call her lawyer." "Now, not later." I nodded, already reaching for my phone. I moved to a quieter corner of the hospital, away from the main desk, and searched through the documents until I found it, a business card tucked neatly into one of the folders. Her lawyer. My fingers hovered over the number for a second. It was the middle of the night. But then I remembered my grandmother's voice. "We don't have much time," so I pressed call. It rang longer than I expected, each tone stretching my nerves tighter. Just when I thought it would go to voicemail, a voice answered, sharp, alert, and very much awake. "This is Margaret Hale. I'm sorry to call so late," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is," I told her, adding my grandmother's name immediately after. There was a brief pause. Then her tone changed. "What's happened?" she asked. Relief washed over me. She knew exactly who I was talking about. I explained everything as quickly and clearly as I could. The hospital, my father's claims, the documents, the pressure he had been putting on my grandmother. When I finished, there was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, "I was afraid of this," she said. My grip tightened on the phone. "You knew." "I suspected," she replied. "Your grandmother mentioned that he'd been pushing for changes, but she wanted to wait. She said she didn't trust the timing." A bitter feeling settled in my chest. "She was right," I said. "Yes, she was," the lawyer agreed. "Listen to me carefully. Do not let him near her with any documents. I'll be there first thing in the morning. In the meantime, I'm going to contact the hospital and make it clear that any decisions must be verified through me." "Thank you," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "This isn't over," she added firmly. "But you did the right thing by calling." When the call ended, I stood there for a moment, letting everything sink in. For the first time since this started, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. That someone else saw what was happening and was ready to fight it. By morning, everything had shifted. The quiet tension of the night was replaced by movement, voices, and a growing sense that something serious was unfolding. Staff members spoke in hushed tones. There were more questions, more glances in my direction. But they felt different now. Less dismissive. More aware. And then he arrived. My father walked into the hospital like he owned the place. His expression calm but his eyes sharp, scanning the area. The moment he saw me sitting outside room 312, that calm cracked. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, striding toward me. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied. His jaw tightened. "You're not supposed to be here." "And yet," I said evenly, "here I am." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty. Then it hardened into anger. He turned toward the nearest nurse, his voice rising. "I specifically instructed that she was not to be allowed in. There are concerns about her mental state." "That's been noted." Another voice interrupted. We both turned. The lawyer. She stood a few feet away, composed and unshaken, a folder in her hands. "And those claims are now under review?" she continued. "Along with your recent attempts to alter legally binding documents under questionable circumstances." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my life, my father didn't have an immediate response. Didn't have control. "You have no authority here," he said finally, but there was a crack in his confidence now. "Actually," she replied calmly, "I do." And just like that, everything shifted. The same man who had tried to lock me out, to erase me with a few carefully chosen words, was now the one being questioned. Watched. Limited. He glanced at me then. Something dark and unfamiliar in his expression. But I didn't look away. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I stayed with her every day after that. Once everything had been set in motion, the lawyer involved, the staff aware, my father no longer able to control access, the hospital room became something different. Not just a place of illness, but a space where truth finally had room to breathe. I made sure of that. Each morning. I arrived early, often before the halls were fully awake, before the noise and movement of the day could interrupt the quiet moments I wanted to hold on to. And every time I stepped into her room, there was a brief second of fear that I might walk in and find it empty. But she was always there. We didn't waste time pretending things were normal. There was no denial, no false hope. Instead, we talked. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. Sometimes it was about the past, stories I had heard a dozen times growing up, but now listened to like they were something sacred. She told me about her childhood, about mistakes she had made, about choices she wished she could redo. Her voice would grow soft at certain points, her eyes distant, but there was no regret in the way she spoke, only honesty. Other times we talked about the present. About what had happened. About my father. "I always knew he needed control," she said one afternoon, her voice tired but steady. "But I didn't realize how far he would go." I sat beside her, my fingers wrapped gently around her hand. "You couldn't have known," I said. She gave a faint smile. "Maybe not. But I should have seen it sooner." There was a pause, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she added quietly. The words caught me off guard. "For what?" I asked. "For the times I didn't speak up," she said. "For the times I let things go, thinking it would keep the peace. I didn't realize what it was costing you." My chest tightened. "You don't have to apologize," I said quickly. "You're here now. That's what matters." She squeezed my hand weakly. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," she said. Stronger than he ever understood. The words stayed with me long after she said them. Because for so long, I hadn't felt strong. I had felt dismissed, overlooked, reduced to whatever version of me my father chose to present to the world. But sitting there, in that quiet room, I began to see something different. Not just who I had been told I was, but who I actually was. The lawyer came by regularly, updating us on everything. The documents had been secured, verified, and corrected where necessary. My grandmother made her wishes clear, firmly, without hesitation this time, fairness, clarity, no room for manipulation. Every signature she placed felt like an act of defiance against everything my father had tried to do. He still came to the hospital, but things were different now. He was watched, questioned, restricted. The same authority he had once used to keep me out was now being turned back on him. Staff members no longer took his words at face value. They double-checked. They asked questions. They documented everything. And he hated it. I saw it in the way his expression tightened whenever he entered the room, in the way his eyes flicked toward me with barely concealed frustration. But he didn't confront me again, not directly. Because he knew the situation had shifted. He knew he wasn't in control anymore. The days blurred together. marked by small routines, adjusting her blanket, helping her sip water, sitting in silence when words felt unnecessary. There was a quiet intimacy in those moments, something fragile and real. And then, one evening, everything slowed. There was no dramatic change, no sudden alarm. Just a subtle shift in the air, like the room itself knew something was coming. Her breathing grew softer, more uneven. I leaned closer, my heart already beginning to ache. "I'm here," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Her eyes opened, finding mine with surprising clarity. "I know," she said faintly. There was no fear in her expression. Only peace. "Don't let him take anything from you," she murmured. "Not your voice. Not your place." "I won't," I promised, my throat tightening. She gave a small nod, as if that was all she needed to hear. For a while, we just stayed like that, my hand in hers, the quiet rhythm of her breathing filling the space between us. And then it stopped. No sudden movement. No dramatic moment. Just a stillness that settled gently, like the end of something that had already begun to fade. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, holding her hand, letting the reality settle in slowly. She wasn't alone. That mattered. More than anything, that mattered. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements, paperwork, and quiet conversations. Grief came in waves, sometimes sharp and overwhelming, other times distant and almost unreal. But underneath it all, there was something steady, something resolved. The legal aftermath wasn't easy. My father tried to push back, to challenge the decisions, to create doubt where there was none. He questioned the timing, the process, even my involvement. But it didn't work. The evidence was clear. The documents were valid. And most importantly, my grandmother's intentions had been documented beyond question. Every attempt he made only seemed to weaken his position further. People who had once taken his word without hesitation began to look at him differently, more critically, more carefully. The trust he relied on had cracks in it now. And those cracks were growing. In the end, there was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match, no final explosion of anger. Just quiet consequences. The kind that settle in slowly but permanently. The kind that don't need to be loud to be undeniable. When everything was finalized, when the last document was signed, and the last decision confirmed, I stood outside the lawyer's office and took a deep breath. It was over, not the grief, not the memories, but the fight, and I had won. Not because I was stronger than him in some obvious way. Not because I had power or influence. But because I refused to disappear. He had tried to erase me. To reduce me to something small, something unreliable, something easy to dismiss. But in doing that, he had underestimated something fundamental. I had been paying attention, learning, growing. And when it mattered most, I had stepped forward instead of backing down. I had chosen to act instead of staying silent. And that changed everything. As I walked away, I realized something that felt almost unfamiliar. I wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. The doubt, the hesitation, the need to prove myself. It had all loosened its grip. Because I didn't need his validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me who I was. I knew. And that was something he could never take from me. He tried to control the story. But in the end, I became the one who finished it.